Hello, and welcome to the 57th episode of Recluse Horror. This is a daily horror movie review podcast. So just a little background on the project. Back in April, on my birthday, I decided I wanted to watch and review a horror movie every single day. So each episode, or most episodes anyway, I talk about two movies, one of which I've watched that very night, and another that I've reviewed previously in text, aided, of course, by the text review itself. All of the reviews before the podcast started were in text. So today is going to be one of those episodes. I am actually going to talk about two movies, not three, not one. And today, the movie that I'm talking about is Autumn from 2017. It's a short film, came out in October of 2017. This one you can find on the, on the Brenna MP page. That's the writer of it. That's Brenna, and then Empey, Empey. Guaranteed I'm pronouncing that wrong, but I don't know. Anyway, this one was okay. It definitely isn't my favorite. The sound needed a lot of work, and some of the other elements also needed work, but it's far from the worst project I've ever seen. It does not have an IMDb page, so I don't have very much information about it that wasn't, already listed here, and there really isn't very much, so... Basically, the story follows a librarian who meets a vampire named Autumn, and the relationship that they have following that, I guess. The movie is 14 minutes and 41 seconds with the credits, so about 14 minutes. And yeah, like I said, it's not bad. It's definitely not my favorite. It does have some problems in pretty much every area, but it doesn't feel like a fully professional film. And I thought they did. I mean, again, there's not very much information about this, but considering what they did have, I think it's clear that this is people learning, and you can see them going through that process. Audio is one of the hardest things to really nail down if you don't have experience. And really, the problems with the audio, everything kind of, and I was never able to pin down for sure that this is what's happening. And in fact, in a lot of ways, I think it kind of isn't. But it seemed like everything was sort of, all the dialogue was recorded in post, because you don't get any room tone at all. You don't get, everything sounds a little bit muffled, like they put the audio file into Audacity or something like that and just like mixed out too much of the background noise or mixed it improperly. I have no idea which of those circumstances is true, if any. But it was a little bit distracting for me personally. It probably is not something that you would necessarily pick up on if you were watching it. And it's not something that you're necessarily trained on, or that you haven't worked with before, but it was sort of distracting. There were a couple of places where you could hear some background noise, so it seems like they were able to filter out most, but not all of it. So it just all sounded a little bit funny. That again is one of the harder parts of working on working on a film project if you don't have experience, and even if you're in even just beyond the editing, if it's not recorded properly in the first place, there's only so much you can do, and this very well could have been recorded improperly, and and so the person who's editing it is like, this is the cleanest that I can get this, and it sounds kind of weird. Not a huge problem. I don't think it's a terribly distracting problem. I did not watch this with headphones, so maybe it would be a little bit worse with headphones. Not really sure. I thought the use of color in the movie was pretty good, but the film the movie itself seemed very washed out. Even though the colors were good, everything seemed a little like it needed some color correction or better, maybe different lighting. I honestly didn't think that it was the lighting. I think it's something to do with the camera. Again, these are all problems I could not really nail down. And it's kind of small potatoes if what you're looking for is a good story. The story itself is actually pretty, somewhat interesting. I think it's something that's kind of been done a few times before in different, one form or another. So it's not terribly new. The real problem with this short film is the ending. And this is not a problem with the writing. I think the way that the movie plays out, if you think about the script as a separate entity, what happens has a beginning, middle, and end, and it does make sense the way that everything plays out. But there's something about the end that kind of feels like they needed to hammer home the point of what they were getting across a little bit more, or maybe just pace it a little bit better to give to let the impact of the last moments of the short film really land with the audience. Again, that's something that can be really hard to do if you don't have experience. It's very nuanced, and you do definitely have to have a talent for storytelling in the editing room for that. I know these are kind of weird problems to be hitting on or even talking about. The film as a whole is fine. It just it lacks anything that really makes it stand out. I thought the acting was fine. There were a couple of rough moments. Some of the dialogue probably could have used some work, although what they're saying is fine. It's more just how they're saying it. And that's probably a combination problem between writing. There's a lot of little problems, but they definitely do add up to making the movie sort of more unsatisfactory than you might, want, I guess. I think the effects were done pretty well. Even if the effects were sort of unrealistic to the reality of what they were trying to get across. I won't say specifically what I'm talking about, in case you want to watch it, but it is slightly unrealistic if you are familiar with the thing that's going on. I really there's no way to talk about what I'm trying to talk about, so I'm just gonna abandon it. I'll just say that the effects are fine. They're kind of good. There is a makeup moment with the vampire that is does not look good. Just doesn't look good. I wouldn't say that it was terrible. I was gonna say that it was just exaggerated or something like that. But other than that, pretty much everything kind of works the way I think they're trying to get it to work. As far as the appearance of the film goes, besides the problems that I've already mentioned. I don't know. It's honestly, this is just clearly a work in progress. All of the people that I looked up that were involved in the project have been involved in film in some capacity, but it seems like other than one of the actors that I looked up, there's really only the two. There's one other slight character, and then there's some background people. But one of the two actors, the one who plays the librarian, he's been in a few things acting wise that have been like major things. They were small roles, but they were big pictures sort of deals. So he's the one who seems to have the most relevant experience, and he was pretty good as far as the acting was concerned. Like I said, couple moments that may have had more to do with the writing. The person, Brenna Ampe, or I can't remember what her name was. I think it was Brenna Ampe, has credits in like the art department, and she's done some filming, like physical camera work is what it sounded like. But she was the writer of this, and this may be the first piece that she's written. For a first piece that got made into something, and it may not be, like I said, this doesn't have an IMDb page. It's it's just as likely that she's written something else that wasn't put onto IMDb. But as far as that goes, were it to be a first attempt at something that got made into a short film, I have seen much worse out there. I just think there are a lot of different areas where this could be worked on. This is another one of those movies that I would say is a really good piece to try to examine if you're a film student or something, and kind of see what worked, what didn't work. just sort of reflect and see other people's attempts at things, and not to really pick it apart, in some sort of a negative way, and in a nitpicky, haha, look at these people doing something bad, but in a I can learn from this experience way. I think this would be kind of a rewarding one to choose, because there's so many things that are fairly impressive, considering like the range of budget that I'm thinking that they're working within, and there are a lot of things that could be improved one way or another, whether it means, a little bit more work on how you edit, or how you storytell through visuals and stuff like that, or, any number of different ways. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's really all I have to say about this one. It's not a bad choice. I just don't think it's like really made for a whole consumer audience, like a big, huge audience. For film students, it's a pretty good example. It's something that you're not going to be able to just like scribble away forever and have all of these problems and think, oh, this is just terrible. You're definitely going to be able to learn something from this. Beyond that, it doesn't really have too much commercial appeal. Even on a free level, you could probably find something better to do with your 15 minutes, honestly. And I don't really mean that in a harsh way. But that's just kind of how it is. I would definitely be interested in seeing something else that some of these people worked on at some point, maybe in a few years after they've had a chance to sort of work through some things and kind of, improve their skill level from where they are. Anyway, so that's my review of Autumn from 2017. So the other movie that I wanted to talk about today is I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives Inside the House from 2016. This movie comes from the same director as, his name is Osgood Perkins. He was the director of The Black Coat's Daughter. And this was a Netflix original. I really liked this one quite a bit. I understand this movie definitely isn't for everybody. It is very slow. It is sort of sparse in a lot of different ways. There's a ton of narration. So there are definitely some things that are just going to immediately turn people off of it. Personally, I loved this one. I did like this better than The Black Coat's Daughter, although they kind of appeal on different levels to me, so it's sort of a hard comparison. The house in which the movie takes place is beautiful, delicate, and not overly or distractingly decorated, while still managing not to feel empty or cheap to me. The actor playing the lead, her name is Ruth Wilson, does an excellent job with what would have been a difficult style of narration and line delivery for most actors, and totally carries the movie on her shoulders, having all but a fraction of the lines and screen time completely to herself. All that said, and I said it before, but if you can't deal with this slow, sort of careful pace of the movie, you're not going to like this one. You're just going to find this entirely boring. So, in the movie, Lily, a hospice nurse, comes to care for an aging horror novelist that appears to be suffering from dementia in the house that she's lived in for decades. Left mostly alone with only her charge as company, who insistently refers to her as Polly, she begins to feel not all is right with the house. Now, being a podcast fan, obviously, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and my favorite ones, personally, are the fictional podcasts. I do listen to a few others, like I said, the true crime podcasts and stuff like that. But the fiction ones, those are the ones that really have my heart. As you might guess from somebody who has reviewed, several hundred horror movies in several hundred days, I am a fan of fiction. And I feel like I would be sort of remiss if I didn't mention the sometimes striking similarities between this movie and a podcast called Mabel. As I watched the movie, I immediately became aware that they share a similar premise and assumed that the podcast had taken inspiration from this movie, but by the time the movie was released, 5 episodes of the podcast had already come out. The movie came out almost exactly 1 month after the first episode of Mabel came out, so it's clear that while the concept and much of the execution is eerily similar, especially with the early episodes, the two were almost definitely created with no knowledge of each other. While the stories part ways as the episodes go on, the heavily stylized narration, the premise, and the sense from very early that there's something off about what's going on are shared by both works. So if you have seen this movie and you are a podcast fan, which I'm going to go ahead and assume you probably are if you're listening to this, unless you're just listening because you know me, then it might be worth checking out Mabel as well. You can find the podcast at mabelpodcast.com. That's Mabel spelled Mabel. So it's kind of interesting. It's definitely not my favorite fiction podcast, but it's, if you like prose and sort of, I don't even want to talk about the visuals or anything because, well, it's a podcast, but there are definitely some certain descriptors. But if you like this movie and you like podcasts, I would definitely say you should try checking it out. Anyway, back to the movie. So the house, like I said, it's gorgeous in a clean and simple sort of way, and the choice of costumes completely enhances this. Despite the heavy emphasis on the narration, which can be bothersome or misused in other movies, it fits this story like a glove. There are a few effects, and some probably could have been done a bit better, but those lapses are fairly painless even for someone who's not always fond of CGI like me. As I said before, the movie comes from the writer-director Oz Perkins, and it was only the 5th movie he'd written and the 2nd he'd directed, which is really incredible. The lighting and shots were terrific throughout the film, making sets that would easily become stale or seem too sterile into a perfect setting to emphasize the superior acting and writing of the film. If you liked The Black Coat's Daughter, I wouldn't really worry about the pace of this movie too much. That movie has an incredibly slow pace as well. So, if that was something that you liked, I know this is a very different style of movie, but you might enjoy this one as well. It's definitely worth giving a shot. It's, especially since it's a Netflix original, it is, pretty accessible for most people. The story is simple and doesn't much rely on jump scares or shocking imagery to build itself up, instead carefully building up a sense of ill-ease and discomfort that starts early and lasts completely all the way through the film. For the greatest effect, I suggest watching the film in one sitting, as it would probably lose some of that build if you were up and down a lot or stopped and got back to it later. Despite being 24-hour care for an elderly patient, much of that happens off-camera, which gives the audience a feeling of extreme isolation and being at the mercy of a bizarre house and whatever might be going on there. Though it's light on the scares, the mood was more than adequate to keep me interested and invested. That's something, the longer I go on and the more horror movies I watch, I really appreciate more than anything else. If you've seen it all and you're not going to be scared by, someone chasing some girl in heels, like a slasher movie or something, if that's something that's not going to scare you, if the sort of scenarios that you're coming across in horror movies, if you're just too jaded on them like I am, being able to build discomfort or any kind of a really good mood, that's like almost number one on my list these days. If you can make me feel uncomfortable or anything like that, you're gonna get way more points than trying to scare me, because that almost never happens. I've mentioned it, alluded to it at least a number of times. There is a specific fear that does get me in certain horror movies if it's done the right way. But honestly, it's not something that, even those movies usually don't really hit me on a visceral level the way that building in the right mood does. So if you like moody movies, and you're able to deal with the slow pace, which if you're into moody movies, I'm going to go ahead and assume you probably are, I think this is an easy choice. Honestly, I think it's a really easy choice of a movie for you. If you enjoy movies that take their time and make you feel that something is off, that you and the characters can't quite put your respective fingers on, you'll enjoy this movie. If you're an avid reader, the narrative probably will appeal to you, even if you aren't generally one for horror. If you like the Mabel podcast, this one is a no-brainer, and you'll be struck by the similarities. It really is uncanny. If you like movies like Martin and Rosemary's Baby, you might enjoy this movie as well. Even if modern horror isn't really your thing, this really does seem sort of... it seems like a movie you would see out of the 60s, which I know I've mentioned is my personal favorite era for horror. There's just a certain mood and a certain affectation that you get out of those movies that is sort of unlike any other period of time in a lot of ways for movies, and specifically for horror movies. So while this doesn't exactly feel like a 60s horror movie, I feel like a lot of 60s fans, like if you generally can't stand modern horror, you might try this one. I have a ton of suggestions for this one because this is kind of the sort of movie that I want to get to as many people as will watch it. Like I said, I was very impressed with this movie. Osgood Perkins is right now one of my very, like, the one of the directors that makes me the most excited. Even though not everything I've seen of his is perfect, I definitely, The Girl in the Photographs had a lot of problems, even though he didn't direct that one, which is probably a large portion of the problem. But as far as writer-directors are concerned, he's right up there on my list. I really can't wait to see where his career goes from here. I have no doubt that it'll be completely awesome, but it is something that I've been sort of checking up on pretty frequently. I'll, head over to Google and be like, hey, when's the next one coming out? So, I don't know. It's stupid, but I don't know. Really, really like his stuff, and especially if they can hit on the same notes as The Blackcoat's Daughter and I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives Inside the House, I'm all for it. I'm just so excited. So, anyway, so that's my review of I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives Inside the House from 2016. Definitely check it out. Did I mention it's on Netflix? So, and I guess that's my show. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast for whatever reason, just hear me say the word Netflix over 75 times, then please rate, review, subscribe, whatever it is on whatever site that you found us. If you would like to help out the show, the best way you can do that is to share it with someone that you love or with someone that you think would be interested in the podcast. If you would like to share that with someone and they don't have the same platform as you, or if you don't like the platform that you found us, then we are available on YouTube, Player FM, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, and pretty much any podcatcher out there. If you'd like to reach out to us on social media, you can do so on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and you can email me at reclusehorror@gmail.com. I kind of think that's pretty much all I have. A little bit tired. Probably would have been a better episode if I was less tired, but that's not going to happen for a little while, so... my job is, I've mentioned before about my job and changing jobs recently and stuff like that. My job is going great, but it is quite a different schedule than I'm used to, so I'm trying to get into the groove here, and that's why I end up keep doing these short films. I do have a ton of, like, full-length films that I've been just dying to watch and review and stuff like that. I just, honestly, it's just a time management issue at this point. There aren't enough hours in the day. Once I hit April, I know I've mentioned this before, I'm gonna do a daily episode through the year. Beyond that, I'm gonna switch and throttle way down on how many episodes that I'm doing, and that way I'll be able to give you guys, like, a real review of real movies that you can watch. That aren't not that short films, of course, aren't real movies, but, feature-length movies, that's what most people are into, and that's probably most of what they want to hear reviewed. So, seeing all these titles of movies that, if you're loading up your podcast app or whatever and just see all these titles and you're like, I've never heard of any of these. Well, the reason is because they're all short films, and those aren't necessarily the biggest thing these days, although I think they're getting bigger. But anyway, I really do want to go to doing longer form stuff. I'm going to try this weekend. I don't think I'm doing anything this weekend. It'll be like one of the first weekends since I've started the podcast that I like might actually have stuff. I'm definitely going to try to watch feature-length movies for this weekend, so try to look forward to that if you care. But yeah, I don't know. I guess that's pretty much all I have to say. I don't know why I just kind of launched into that. Like I said, I'm tired and rambling. So anyway, thank you for listening, and good night.